Hey, Mika, how's your scrotum?
Sore.
Yeah? Still healing?
Yeah, it's tender.
So do you have stitches? Or is it like those
so
glue
many
stitches?
No, so many stitches.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you are well on your way to becoming a superior man?
Oh yes,
Yeah?
absolutely. It takes a nice round plump scrotum to make a superior man.
I feel like it might take a little bit more than that. So I think we should ask our friend Rudi for some more information, don't you? Rudi, will you help us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. We've got an adult in the room, so it's time to behave.
Whoops.
Welcome to Thriving Between the Lines, the podcast that examines personal development books through the lens of intersectionality, making self-help content more accessible and relatable. I'm life coach and apparently not so divine feminine, Leslie Crudup Villagarcia.
And I'm Mika, a divine masculine pincushion.
And together, we're not just reading between the lines,
We're thriving between the lines.
And we're coming to you from Meanjin, or Brisbane in Australia, land of the Yagara and Turrbal people where sovereignty has never been ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So, do you need an ice pack for your scrotum?
I mean, it might be a bit awkward in this situation with a guest in the room.
Rudi's looking at us with such judgment.
Hardly.
No, very kind looking face right there.
Yes. So, Rudi, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm also a life coach. I'm a Pilates and breathwork and meditation teacher. I do a lot of work in diversity education in corporate and personal spaces. I myself am a non-binary person. I was assigned male at birth, and I now present more as femme.
And why is it so important to you to be part of this conversation?
Because I think as a culture and as a society, we are really seeing a lot of change and evolution around understandings of gender and around masculinity and femininity and other genders. And we're kind of at this crossroads, I think, where there are new ideas and new appreciations for different ways of being that are emerging. And then there's resistance as well from people who maybe have grown up with a particular set of beliefs and really want to hold on to those and are not ready for to see change happening around them.
I absolutely agree. And this is something that you and I have spoken about at length, especially in the context of personal development.
So many times.
Yes. We talk a lot about the changes that we would love to see in the personal development industry. And it's just so refreshing to have like a good, knowledgeable sounding board for those discussions. Like, I feel very connected to you in that way.
Thank you. I feel the same. And I think it's also because, we often, because we're both in this personal development world, we see a lot of the same stuff and a lot of the same influences, I think, and influential authors. And sometimes you read stuff and you think, is it me or is this just really whack? Sometimes it's the lack of dissenting voices that makes you sometimes. Well, I don't want to speak for you, but for me anyway, I read some stuff and think, does that, am I the only person who is seeing anything wrong with this or anything weird about this? So, sometimes it's very reassuring.
Yes, and thank you for that insight. Mika, what's our book for today?
The Way of the Superior Man, a spiritual guide to mastering the challenges of women, work, and sexual desire by David Deida.
Thank you. I think this definitely qualifies as one of the books that you mentioned, because when I read it, I was like, the person who recommended this book to me clearly knows nothing about me or who I am or what I believe. But on that note as well, Rudi, how did this book come into your life initially?
Look, I don't even specifically know. I think sometime within the last few years, as I was diving deeper and developing an understanding of sex, gender, and sexuality, I think it probably first popped up on my radar in the form of memes. I am sure that long before I became aware of the book itself, I became aware of the author and selected quotations from the book that were popping up in different places on social media. I'm sure that's how it entered my consciousness.
Yeah.
I've come across it a lot in the alternative, spiritual, hippie sort of space, and I didn't realize that this is probably the source, but I've certainly heard a lot of this where someone's acting like they're very spiritual and knowledgeable and modern, and yet expressing these really toxic masculinity type attitudes.
Yeah. And actually, before we dive into the content of the book, let's speak for a moment about toxic masculinity. First, of course, recognizing that we are not the target market for this book, right?
I might be a little bit.
It would be great if we had with us a straight cisgender man who has a different experience of masculinity. But as people who interact with men every day, and someone who has sons, in Rudi's case, it's really important for us to understand what is influencing the culture of the men in our lives who mean something to us and who we really, really care about.
Yeah, and I'll just say that in the trans masc space, there is sometimes I notice an unfortunate attraction towards this hyper masculinity that often actually ends up in a toxic space. So if I can see that some of the target audience can actually be trans men as well.
Yeah. So toxic masculinity, give us your definition, Rudi.
I like to come at it from almost, I guess, a psychological framework of adaptive versus maladaptive. And the idea that, look, absolutely, we would not say that if we look at that, if we unpack that bucket of things that is called masculinity, and we look at all the personality traits that are lumped in there, we would certainly not say that all of them are bad, maybe not even most of them. However, certainly when those traits are misapplied or overused, they certainly can become maladaptive, harmful to people around the man and for the man himself. One of the central themes, I think, of this book is stoicism as a philosophy or as a way of being in the world.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with stoicism. However, when stoicism comes at the cost of a complete inability to express emotion or a complete emotional disconnection from the people around you, I would call that problematic and toxic.
Yeah, it's how stoicism is applied that really matters.
Turns out that things can be actually situational and contextual, and that like one black and white approach is maybe not always useful.
Yeah.
Could be.
And that's certainly something that comes up many, many, many times in the book. The use of absolutes to describe certain situations, especially around gender and things like that. But now that we've created a bit more context for our discussion, let's dive into the material, shall we?
Let's go.
Yeah.
So yes, The Way of the Superior Man. For each of the books we're discussing, it's really important to find something positive about the content or the impact that the book has had, how it has impacted the target audience in a positive way. Sometimes it can get a little complicated, even finding the good in some titles, because I read a lot of books that I don't like as well, because I like to challenge my sensibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be truthful, this one really challenged my sensibilities quite a bit. But Rudi, what are some good things about this book?
Wow. Okay. Well, look, I think for a start, I do think it actually comes from a good place. I think it's always dangerous to impute, authorial intention, but, I do think he genuinely wants to help men. So
okay.
That's a good thing. That's nice. But, for the book itself, there's to find some positive aspects. Like, I don't think that there is anything inherently wrong or undesirable about Stoicism as a philosophy. And that's really what he sets out to do. If you can no more damn him than you could damn Marcus Aurelius. So as a philosophy, fine. But I guess against that, it's the degree to which it's held up as kind of both a universal truth and as the element of biological essentialism that comes into it.
Yeah.
And there's good advice in here. Even like one bit that stuck in my mind was the idea that, as a superior man, if your woman, and I mean, all the language around this is icky, but, taking it as it's presented, if your woman has a problem or is upset about something, don't always rush in and want to fix it. I mean, actually, that's great advice, but I would say that's great advice for any human of any gender.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird when it's presented as this kind of, universal truth.
Yeah.
I think one of the other nice things about the book, and again, it's problematic how it's actually presented, but look, he definitely has a sense of the difference between anatomical and physiological sex versus gender versus sexuality. He clearly understands that difference, and I think a lot of people in this space clearly don't. Now, he goes on to just kind of say, there is all this complexity, but we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
But, I think that's still maybe one step better than not even being aware that there is a difference.
Yeah, or completely dismissing the possibility of there being a difference.
That was something that stood out to me as well. He mentioned it and I was going, oh, maybe he's going to actually address it and show that you can be a man with some feminine traits or a woman with masculine traits. But, and that's very much in quotations, masculine, feminine.
Yeah.
I don't think it's particularly the right terminology.
Yeah.
Something that I liked that I thought is a good point is the way he talks about living your life with purpose and wanting to give yourself back to the community, back to the world. And that's something I do live by, is that I want, every action to be driven by my purpose, my values, and that I do believe in gifting your talents back to the world. They weren't just given to me to use for myself. But then the way he applies it, unfortunately, doesn't hold true to my version of that.
Yeah. I think I do appreciate that he wants to help men. And again, as the two of you have mentioned, that he does point out differences in sexuality, gender, or how those things are different a little bit. And then just kind of bounces off of that trampoline into a different trampoline pit altogether.
Yeah.
So while he has these intentions of helping improve communication between men and women and understanding that sexuality and gender aren't necessarily the same thing, it takes a lot of twists and turns in some dark directions, I think. And Rudi and I, we were chatting, Mika, before you got here, about how David Deida's work is then interpreted by people in a way that has contributed to a lot of what we see happening in the manosphere, in broflake culture, like around masculinity and how we treat our women.
Yes. I can see the evolution of what has started here in the 90s.
Yeah. One thing that I find really interesting and kind of frustrating is the way he says, I think when you really look at how people interpret his information and oversimplify something that's already been severely oversimplified, let's say like, oh no, the masculine and the feminine have nothing to do with gender. And we each have both of those things within us. And like that could be quite a complex conversation. But the way it's then put into this book that could be easily read in 1 or 2 sittings is like, now we're going to talk about men and women. And when we refer to the masculine in this context, we're just talking about men. When we refer to the feminine, we're just talking about your woman. And he throws a little disclaimer in the preface saying like, no, this book is for people who already accept that men are like this, women are like this, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, okay.
I actually thought it would be worth right here to quote the first paragraph.
Yeah.
This book is a guide for a specific kind of newly evolving man. This man is unabashedly masculine. He is purposeful, confident, and directed, living his chosen way of life with deep integrity and humor. And he is sensitive, spontaneous, and spiritually alive with a heart commitment to discovering and living his deepest truth. So he's already saying it's for men and kind of masculine men.
Yeah. What's
Manly
interesting...
Manly men.
What's interesting about that is like, I know men like that, right?
Yeah.
But then taking someone who is like that and then saying, okay, now this is how you do it, and then spewing all this stuff that is just deeply damaging, even to men. I'm like, no.
It very much speaks to some of the aspects of masculinity that put me off transition early on, because I couldn't see my version of what a man is in this cliche of manhood.
Right.
And it really confused me for a long, long time as to how can I be a man if this is what you have to be a man.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those.
Right.
It's really interesting for me to hear you say that, because my experience is almost predictably almost the opposite, and it's like, you know, it's after a lot of soul searching and a lot of introspection and reading and thinking and realizing that, oh, okay, well, maybe the versions of masculinity that are on offer that I see around me, I actually don't really relate or connect to any of those. So what am I even doing here? Why am I even? Do I have to keep doing this? And realizing actually, no, I don't.
And it is actually an important conversation that comes up in the anti-trans movement too, in that they say, oh, you're not trans, you just don't accept that it's okay to be a feminine man or a masculine woman. But like that, the TERFs and things like that.
Yeah.
I would say that, and that's there's actually a lot to unpack there and a lot we can talk about, because I think that there is a truth there, or there's some, even though it's coming from bad actors and unsympathetic people, I think, you know, there is a genuine conversation around, you know, what would the world look like if there were no preconceived gender roles or beliefs being imposed on physiological anatomical sex. We'll never know because we've only got one universe to experiment on, but you know, there is a legitimate line of inquiry, no matter how ill-intentioned, behind that.
Yeah, And there's damage that's done to the trans community too in believing this very binary version of gender. I see a lot of people who feel that they have to be on the far ends of the gender spectrum when all along they belonged somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another section, and I know we're still kind of in the preface here that I want to bounce off of. When he's talking about who this book is for, he says, "The Way of the Superior Man is a book written explicitly for people who have already achieved respect for other genders and sexual preferences, and who consider men and women to be social, economic, and political equals. Now we are ready to move to the next stage, grounded in this mutual respect and equality, but celebrating the sexual and spiritual passions inherent in the masculine, feminine, polarity."
Yeah, look, I highlighted that's exact same passage because it's just like, this is exactly like when your racist old uncle starts to tell us a story or joke and start with, "I'm not a racist, but..."
It's so funny you say that because that's exactly what I wrote on the next page next to it. It's like, oh, yeah. Like, we recognize that there are these people who aren't like us. But now I'm just going to go ahead and just, like, be really offensive to these groups.
Yeah.
But it's okay because I'm spiritual.
I felt a little foolish that when I heard that part of the book, my hopes raised slightly.
Yeah.
And then they came crashing down moments later.
Yeah. The way he describes the masculine and the feminine point to these long-held beliefs about the differences, very gender-based differences, between men and women. Women are these chaos machines, but don't you just love their little ways? They're just kind of flitting about, not really making any sense, flowing like the river, just being energy and being this, and coding it in this like, oh, women are, or the feminine is the universe, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you're saying really crappy things and then trying to punctuate that sentence with like a love heart. It's like, it doesn't work. It doesn't sit well with me.
How much do you want to bet that he read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus and then evolved and made this book?
Oh, I don't know. I think there's a lot of crossover between those ideas.
Well, I think this is the fundamental problem, I mean, with the book, but even more so with the people who quote the book.
Yeah.
Is this idea that, well, there's this group of traits that we recognize as masculine, and this group of the masculine, sorry, and a group of traits that we recognize as the feminine, and anybody can have any group can have some subset of those traits, but we're going to label them explicitly with this language that this is masculine. So, I guess I'd have more sympathy or more respect for that ideology if they just gave them, this is type K and this is type Q. And anyone can have any, but once you explicitly gender that language, you are saying that it is more appropriate, more correct, more superior for a person with this biology to have these traits. So I guess the most fundamental problem of all is this idea of essentialism.
And that's the thing about like why the specific language that these writers use is really important, because as it goes through these filters, as this idea of the masculine, the feminine, go through these filters in society and then come out someone else's mouth, it can be twisted in ways that don't necessarily even align with what the author was originally saying, right? So even someone who might look at this book and say, he's actually got some good ideas and got some good points. Like, these aren't the people who are most vocally engaging in very nuanced conversations about gender and how it, like the place of gender and gender roles in the world. It's bros going, yeah, I'm a man. And because I'm the divine masculine, I'm logical. I control the chaos of my woman. I'm the analytical thinker. That is me in my masculine.
And I absolutely have no emotions affecting any of these decisions. It's purely logic.
Yeah. And the idea that, like, oh, you know, women can have these masculine traits as well. It's like, it's still attributing something to something more acceptable in a man.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pull out a highlight on exactly that point?
Yes,
so,
please.
You know, he writes, keeping your word is a masculine trait in men or women. Right? Okay. A person with a feminine essence may not keep her word, yet it is not exactly lying, in scare quotes. In the feminine reality, words and facts take a second place to emotions and the shifting moods of relationship.
Yeah.
So, number one, how patronizing could you possibly be? But I think that passage, you know, just kind of illustrates how the kind of mental gymnastics that are required here. Because, well, we're saying that honesty is a good thing, and I think we'd probably all agree that it is.
Yeah,
in a person, regardless of their gender.
Yeah.
But that keeping your word is masculine.
Mm.
So that's a good thing. But when women don't keep their word, so they're not exactly lying. It's just they can't help it. It's because truth is kind of is more elastic. It has it's mediated through emotion and through relationship. None of those things that a superior man would have or need to be concerned about. So that's, I think, a perfect illustration of why, how icky it gets.
I'm actually super curious to do a find and replace in this book for masculine as just logical, like change to the word logical, feminine change to the word emotional, and like people just kind of say like this type of person and that type of person, take away the gender. And see how the book reads that way. If we could just take away some of that, like, gender assumptions and, like, yicky.
Well, I mean, and I guess that's a bit about what I was saying earlier, like about the, if we just labeled these things as different personality traits, or like the way that we know that some people move through the world in a more transactional way, and some cultures are more inclined towards a transactional interpersonal relationships, and others are relational. So one of the other things, if we're thinking about intersectionality, that this book brings up is that not only is there one particular version of masculinity that's being lionized here, but it's also a version of masculinity that aligns very closely to contemporary, more specifically, not even Western European, more specifically Northern European Anglophone values.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
And I think a lot of that comes out, especially in part 2, which is labeled Dealing with Women.
Right.
I remember I handed the book over to my partner. I was like, just read the table of contents and just circle things that jump out at you.
But he said it's not specific to men and women, it's feminine and masculine, and it
Essences. It's about
Yeah.
essences.
Yes.
apparently it's just dealing with women.
Yeah. Well, I mean, women are part of this triforce of women, work, and sexual desire, because that's what men strive for, or that's the essence of man. Yeah. And the purpose. He keeps referring to this purpose, this source, this and that, in a very vague sort of way, in a way that is really appealing to some people, but doesn't go into depth about that, because it's not what it's about. It's about dealing with women.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way he paints women, even though, like, you read that section, Rudi, about women not being liars, exactly. I'm going to read the rest of that section, okay? To deepen the illustration,
it keeps going.
He says, when she says, "I hate you," or "I'll never move to Texas," or "I don't want to go to the movies," it is often more a reflection of a transient feeling wave than a well-considered stance with respect to events and experience. On the other hand, the masculine means what it says. A man's word is his honor. The feminine says what it feels. A woman's word is her true expression in the moment. That's a lead-in to a lot of rhetoric around women just not ever saying what they're actually thinking, not saying what they're meaning. And that point gets emphasized over and over and over again in the book in a way that is really not a good thing to have running through our society.
A wonderful excuse to never actually respect a woman's word and wishes, and when she says no, she means no.
Exactly.
Well, and also her expertise. I mean, he quite explicitly in another section talks about how, if you as the superior man are convinced that you are right about something, but your woman tells you that that you're not, you shouldn't give in to her. You should do whatever it is that you think is correct, because even if it turns out you're wrong, you'll have learnt something. and that is somehow more desirable, or that's what you want more than actually you could have made a much better decision if you were listened to somebody else's expertise. It's really weird.
I wish I was wearing my heart rate monitor, because just even the mention of it makes my heart just like so angry.
Yeah. I found it really challenging to spend so much time in this space, reading this book, reading reviews of the book, watching review videos of the book, which again went in all these quite toxic directions. I remember one guy's review of the book was like, no, this is simping to women too much, saying that women are in everything and the feminine is in everything, blah, blah. He thought it was too respectful to women. And so it just, like he didn't like the book for that reason. But it's like...
That is a wild take.
I know. I was surprised. I was like, okay. Like, I can sort of see when people will say, no. It's reverent of women and women's moods and things like that. Like, there's a lot of language in there that tries to paint that picture. I get it. But to say that it's too far into the respect for women stage, that it risks emasculating men, that was not a vibe. But in this dealing with your woman section, there's one part called "Don't Analyze Your Woman," because again, masculine, feminine, it's not gender, but don't analyze your woman. This is how he opens it. The feminine's moods and opinions are like weather patterns. They are constantly changing, severe and gentle, and they have no single source. What, like a brain? No analysis will work. There is no linear chain of cause and effect that can lead to the kernel of the problem. There is no problem, only a storm, a breeze, a sudden change in weather. And the bases of these storms are the high and low pressure systems of love. When a woman feels love flowing deeply, her mood can instantly evaporate into joy, regardless of the supposed reason for the mood. Now, when I read that, Mika, I was instantly taken back to our discussion about the 5 love languages. Where it's like, no. Women are these silly creatures that you just need to give them a bit of what they want and make them feel loved, and then everything's fine. It's fine.
There's also this really sinister note, I think, that creeps into that part of the book, which is around control.
Yep.
And I think the one anecdote that he has in there that stuck with me was he was talking about, like, for a man, the best way to organize a birthday party. Do you remember this bit? He said, like, for a man, if you want to celebrate a man's birthday, the best thing you can do is to ask him what he wants and do that. But the best way to organize a woman's birthday party is to just make all of the plans without her and then tell her, honey, this is what we're doing. Which is, I mean, it's comical in its oversimplification, but it's really sinister in terms of what it says about how the kind of relationship dynamic that he is holding up as not just desirable, but essentially true.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, a part of the big problem is this idea that of homogeneity, that every relationship is like this or should be like this, or every woman is like this or should be like this, and every man is like this or should be like this. None of it, even trivial stuff like a birthday party, none of this stands up to any kind of close scrutiny. It's clearly incorrect.
Yeah. And speaking of things not standing up to close scrutiny, it's another one of these books that doesn't actually provide any evidence or backing for what he's saying. Like his bio, and even if you look at his Wikipedia page and his website, talks about doing research at these universities and all this stuff. And it's like, why is none of that in here? Yeah. Why are there 0 citations? There's nothing, not a single footnote, nothing that doesn't reference.
Logical.
Yes. Oh, there's me getting all chaotic again. This is just how I feel at this moment. Like, my mood can change at any second. So, don't trust anything I have to say.
Yeah, he's missed one of the key points of logic, and being logical is you can back up everything you say with evidence.
Yeah. Because he'll bring in, specific percentages as well of relationships. Like, 10% of relationships have a masculine this, a feminine this, and 80% are this and this, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, where are you getting these numbers from? Just tell us a little bit where these numbers are coming from.
Citation needed.
Exactly. All of us being neurodivergent people who have different experiences of gender and such from this book, even our relationship with research and evidence and facts comes into play there.
My neurodivergence is I'm autistic, as well as ADHD and attentive type. But the autistic part of me, I do look for citations. I do look for, I actually place a really high value on evidence.
Yes.
And evidence-based approaches. And I do, when I read something that's it's that old saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, and to me, again, if you were to take either a historical context or a cross-cultural context, either one or both, again, the fact that this stuff is, it's clearly just made up, right? there's no, because if these things were universal truths, we would expect two things: that these ideas of masculinity and femininity, or the masculine and the feminine in a biologically essential way, we would expect that they would not change over time. And that if we looked back at different periods of even Western history, we would see that those same truths were the same all the way through, and clearly they're not. And we would also be able to look cross-culturally and say, well, we're all humans. We all have the same DNA. We would be able to say that across all cultures on the globe, that masculinity and femininity are expressed exactly the same way. And also clearly not true.
Yeah.
So if this is purely arbitrary, and he's perfectly, within his rights, and as we all are, to define what we think makes up, a superior man or superior woman. The language, of course, itself is terrible and terribly tainted by 20th century history, if nothing else. But, we would, but to claim, that's one thing, but then to claim that what I value or what I like is somehow universally true of all humans. That's a stretch. That's a big stretch. It's
and he uses the word
claim.
Always a lot in here.
Yeah, absolutely. And those same sort of big percentages, 90% of men are like this. Out of which cohort? 90% of which men? On an evidence-based approach, corporate America in the 80s became uncomfortably aware that some of their corporate practices did not work universally well in all parts of the world. And it came as a big shock. It's like the way we do the way that corporate America was doing business in America sometimes didn't work real well in Japan. And and so this led to, I don't want to trivialize it, because I think it did lead to some interesting and useful research into, and we can say, no shit, different cultures tend to value different things, but there was some actual good solid research that came out of it. A book like this seems weirdly regressive to me. It seems like a product of a very different age, where that kind of self-knowledge, that what I am holding up as a universal truth here is maybe true of a particular time and place, or my particular preference, or the way I would like the world to work. But beyond that, it's fantasy.
Yeah. And it's fair enough to write a book saying, hey, this is the lens through which I see the world, if you would like to see that. But he presents it as fact and truth. And those are two totally different things. You're allowed to have both those things in the world, but you need to be clear about which one you are.
As an autistic person, one of the things that always irks me is when people hold up a particular book or film or something as this is a good book, and it's clear that the particular criterion they've used is whether they liked it or not.
Yeah.
Which, and to me, the question of whether I like something or not, or whether I think something is good or not, to me, two completely separate questions that my Aspie brain cannot bridge, because I know that I like a lot of things that are objectively trash. And conversely, there's a lot of really good stuff out there that for whatever reason just never landed with me, or I just wasn't interested in.
Yeah.
So similar to this, right? So the idea that this is the kind of man that I respect, or that I look up to, or that I aspire to be, perhaps in his case. I mean, I don't even know if he lives like this himself, but I haven't looked that far into his personal history. But this is what I like, or what I respect, or what I look up to, versus this is the best, the objectively best, and in fact, objectively only way to organize a society is weird.
Like, we can have our individual views of a book that we don't like and say, I don't like this, for our own personal reasons, and then just not really give it another thought, right? But then sometimes when you come across a book that it's like, ooh, what I don't like is the clear societal impacts of the ways of thinking that are promoted in this book, that's when it really matters to dive in and analyze and discuss how language is being used to manipulate people, whether that's the intention or not. Having a linguistics background, that's something that I zero in on anytime I'm reading, right?
And I think that's an important part about personal freedom in our societies, is I think everyone deserves freedom of speech and freedom of expression and everything, until you start causing harm to others.
Yes.
And that's where the line needs to be drawn.
Yes. In this book, it's like you can find these places where it's almost as if he's grooming us as the reader to see women as something to be controlled by men. Some paragraphs really stood out more to me than others, but I'll read one from the section titled, "Don't Suggest That a Woman Fix Her Own Emotional Problem." Okay. So, this is the paragraph. Like the ocean, the native state of the feminine is to flow with great power and no single direction. The masculine builds canals, dams, and boats to unite with the power of the feminine ocean and go from point A to point B. But the feminine moves in many directions at once. The masculine chooses a single goal and moves in that direction. Like a ship cutting through a vast ocean, the masculine decides on a course and navigates the direction. The feminine energy itself is undirected but immense, like the wind and deep currents of the ocean, ever-changing, beautiful, destructive, and the source of life. That is another classic shit sandwich. It's saying something nice, saying something really crappy in the middle, but then it's like, like, what are you doing, dude? Because what this connects to, with how it's being interpreted and promoted in online spaces dedicated to men, masculinity, manhood, from that control aspect, is it's again saying our role as men is to control our women. What they say and what they do can't really be relied upon. And it feeds into some of the darker elements of the book, kind of in the later chapters, where it really starts talking about the dark masculine and the sexual aspects of men and women engaging together, and this whole like ravishing your woman in a way that, again, it's like if you've been training all your readers up until that point to not really take seriously what the woman says, what influence is that going to have on their sexual interactions with women?
Well, and his, quite explicit and direct commentary about that, if you're this kind of masculine man, then of course you're going to be irresistibly drawn to every teenage girl.
Oh, the 18-year-old babysitter.
Right.
Oh,
who gives off
yeah,
this
that
energy,
was
right?
weird.
Yeah, that whole thing about the 18-year-old babysitter, that really freaked me out, because it was another one of these, like, the way he talks about feminine attractiveness and young women in particular. It's another way that he's being tested.
Yeah, I mean, every time I think you see a man, being very careful to point out that this girl is 18.
Yeah.
I think that's always a red flag, right? For saying, well, but we wish it could be otherwise, right? I think that's implicit there, because if the only problem he has is the legality and that he might get in trouble, I think there's something much more sinister going on. And then I guess it's a bit of a segue, but just the idea, why are there women in this world anyway? And and I think he actually explicitly says it. When you're talking about your woman, not only is her simple existence a test for you, like that's why she's here, right? And there is this
To tempt you with the apple.
right. So again, there is this ancient mythology around woman as temptress, woman as tester. It's the downfall of Adam. It's the downfall of King Arthur.
Those silly women.
That's right. And so again, it's this casting of women into particular roles where she is decentralized. Like the man is the central character of this narrative, and also the only one with any real agency. And her purpose is simply, it revolves around him, and revolves around being a test for him.
Yeah.
It's really deeply weird.
Yeah. And it's wild how often that comes up in personal development writing as well. Do you remember, Mika, in our discussion about No Excuses by Brian Tracy, his whole thing about how you should never, ever, unless for business purposes, go have lunch or dinner with a member of the opposite sex, because then you're going to start banging. It's written in such a way that it's like, women don't have agency. They're there to test you and your ability to stay faithful to your wife.
Yes.
And it comes,
time and time again. And this whole idea that, and I see it expressed so often in other online spaces about, can men and women ever really just be friends? It's like, I mean, if your whole interaction with another person is based on whether or not you think they're bangable, or that you would, and that I guess that if you're a man, and this comes out in the book, right? If you're a man, you can't help but be attracted to that, and there will be a sexual dimension to the relationship. I don't know if I highlighted it, but that's that's in there. And again, it's interesting because this is another piece of evidence that we have that this is cultural mythology, because you go back 150 years, and it was women who were portrayed that way. The belief
Yes.
was that women were uncontrollable and could not control their desires. And I'm sure everyone here knows the derivation of the very word hysterical.
Yep. Which comes up in this book.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
But now, the cultural narrative has shifted, and there's this belief that it's men who can't control themselves, and that these vile temptresses around them cause them to deviate from their sacred purpose.
But
it's weird.
don't forget, men are logical and women are emotional.
Right.
And clearly it's very logical to be tempted and to have no control over your desires.
Yeah. Especially when there's a young woman around.
I relate a lot to what you said about the neurodivergence, because my neurodivergence also has that like hyper logical to the point of being almost a little difficult to deal with in this society. And to me, I actually don't get attracted to someone until it logically makes sense. So I'm like, oh yeah, pretty, that's fine. Like I notice that. But then I don't have any actual desire until I'm like, oh, these things align in our life goals and our personalities. So I don't see how what he says is anything but just pure emotionally unregulated, like wild, exactly what he's saying they are not.
Yeah.
I think it also, what you're saying, Mika, also highlights the normalization that he has around particular forms of sexual expression. That I don't think asexual or demisexual people exist in Daida's worldview.
Yeah.
And well, clearly we know that heterosexual attraction is what he's about. So
Yeah. Although he does give a nod to homosexuals in
he
saying that, like,
sorry, yes,
They exist.
Yep,
If-
they do exist.
two men in a relationship, one is the masculine and one is the feminine.
Right, that was the other thing that really annoyed me.
And I was like, it drives me. Like I've heard other people parrot that idea.
Yeah.
And I think how deeply offensive, first of all, but also how deeply illogical. And where does this idea come from?
Well, and again, completely unsubstantiated, completely
Exactly.
unbacked by either experience or research. But that was exactly another thing about this book was the degree to which sexual attraction and sexual desire is mediated through power.
Yeah.
So for him, it's about tops and bottoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nothing else, right? And the idea that this other idea of polarity that I think has become deeply problematic in self-help and personal development space. The idea that yes, a gay relationship can only be understood through that power dynamic, and again, like, even by doing a thought experiment, you yourself can see that the idea that one or the other gay partner must be of a masculine essence and one of a feminine essence is pure bullshit. Because if you can, if you're a person who is exclusively attracted to men or attracted to men and women, you can easily imagine a scenario where you can imagine two really hot guys getting it off. You've got my permission to take a minute here and imagine it. Right? Imagine those two guys, whatever that
Safe
kind
search
of
off.
really, whatever that kind of peak masculinity is to you, no pun intended. These guys are getting it on. Which one is masculine? Which one is feminine in that picture? And quite possibly neither. And you can do the same experiment if you're attracted to women. Imagine two ultra feminine women together, and which one of them is masculine in your mind's eye here? Probably, like you can easily disprove this to yourself.
Yeah. It's just whoever's more logical and has more control over the situation, that they've got to be the masculine one.
Well, yeah, because which one, and again, to come back to this idea of power, which one is pinning the other to the bed? Now, this is language that he uses, right, to describe, are you the one who likes to pin somebody to a bed, or are you the one who likes to get pinned to a bed? And, like,
or
you know,
what if you're neither?
well, but that doesn't exist in this worldview, right? It's about this power. And yes, absolutely. Sexual relationships and sexual experiences can have that power exchange or power dynamic, and great if that's what you like and that's what you want to do. But again, it's this tendency to universalize and homogenize these experiences that is clearly wrong.
Yeah.
I absolutely reckon he's would believe in that idea that if you are a man who lets someone enter you, you immediately have like lost your masculinity. You've been effeminate. You've been feminized by that experience. Whereas me, as a bottom, I describe myself as like a topping bottom.
Okay.
Like, because I do prefer like the more active, in control role, but like where the things go in and out, like doesn't really matter in that situation.
I think that would blow his tiny mind.
And if not his disciples.
Well, yeah. To be fair.
Because, again, there are people who have read David Deida's work, who have been to his retreats and seminars, who know everything about the guy, a lot more than I know about the guy, which is like fair enough. But just based on my conversations with people who have interacted with him or who have more knowledge of his teachings and this and that, he kind of separates himself from the impact of his work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And this is something that a lot of people who are kind of, spiritual teachers throughout history have done. Even if it's not intentional, sometimes things can happen among the communities that you've created, the diaspora that forms around you, that you can kind of separate yourself from. And it's like, well, that's them misinterpreting my work. And fair enough, there is an argument for that.
But does he, I mean, and I don't know, does he actually go as far as calling those people out and disclaiming them and saying, actually, no, you've got it completely wrong. That's not what I meant at all.
That I don't know. I don't know about that. I haven't seen any evidence of that. I haven't seen anything like that.
Because that's, we've seen even in the anti-trans movement, right? And people say, well, Nazis showed up at our rally. Now, I didn't ask them to be there, and obviously I'm not a Nazi. Yeah, or even a very prominent author who shall not be named, who
I was about to bring them up,
right? Who quite who has taken great pains to say that they are not discriminatory or bigoted in any way, and yet when they are so consistently quoted in that space, and I just haven't seen that person come out and say, actually, no, stop name-checking me there, because that's not what I'm about.
And that's one of the challenges with this kind of thing. Like the way the information that the author puts out, which, again, just based on this book, is still very troubling. The way it becomes amplified, the more people have like direct means of influencing people with their YouTube channels, with their own podcasts, this and that, especially in the pickup artist scene, in the alpha male culture. It's like the way we have these conversations matters.
Well, especially since I think a lot of, and to get back to that polarity word that I hate so much, but how much of that is really indistinguishable from 1950s style sexism.
Yeah.
Just given, a bit of a makeover.
Yeah.
And okay, but now we're going to not call it that. We're going to say that these are these essential differences, and that, and again, I highlighted some of this because it was, sexual attraction is based on sexual polarity, which is the force of passion that arcs between masculine and feminine poles. And the idea that to have intimacy, to have passion, relies on maintaining this artificial and arbitrary and culturally invented difference
Yeah.
is, again, like it's counterfactual. It's demonstrably untrue. And look, and at the same time, I want to, I think we do need to say, if that's what you're into, then great. If everyone is participating in a way that is safe, sane, and consensual, go for it.
Yeah.
And you want to do the 50s, you've got a 50s housewife fetish, you both want to do that?
Rock and roll.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. but to hold it up as a universal truth, and I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but that's the part that continually troubles me about the book, is this idea that not only is this an option for you, but in fact it's the option. This is the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because so many people who do latch onto these ideas in the book already have these notions of the role of a man, the role of a woman, and this just reinforces those beliefs already.
Well, it's simplistic.
Yeah.
And it's uncritical. So it's very easily digested, right? And there is decades, if not centuries, of cultural force behind it. So it's actually quite easy to swallow. Like it's already been, the stage has been set for you to just absorb this stuff.
Yeah. And it's repackaging ideas that, again, put women in a position of subservience, put women in a lower point in this hierarchy of gender, and overemphasizing the role of the feminine as being someone who is attractive to a man and someone who like raises that excitement in a man. But in this chapter, the feminine is abundant. Well, I think that's why this guy was saying, no, this is too respectful to women. It's like, maybe the feminine isn't abundant. Maybe women should just know their place. Anyway, again, it's this poetic notion of what feminine energy is, right? He says, okay, you are living in an ocean of feminine energy right now. Well, I certainly am. Feminine energy is filling your body with life, beating your heart and breathing your breath. There are women all around you who, with the proper initiation into mutually surrendered loving, would feed every cell of your body with juicy, enlivening, rejuvenative feminine energy. It's like, okay, that... Like, what picture is this actually painting? Especially the word initiation. With proper initiation, if you take the control to initiate this feminine...
Well, and again, it's not specifically in this text, but certainly we've seen where some of the disciples take that, right? And
yeah.
And the idea that it is natural and normal and right
yes.
for a man to want to be with a much younger woman whom he can mold or initiate or control, right? So that's where these ideas end up.
Well, that actually brings up something that's came up for me throughout this book. The woman he describes throughout so much of this, I am so unattracted to. Like, she's an infantile character. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about others, but I am very not attracted to infantile people. Like, I want to date adults.
In the section, young women offer you a special energy.
Right.
He describes women, or young women, as being so fresh, so innocent, so alive. Oh, this is the 18-year-old babysitter. Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine you are driving your 18-year-old babysitter home one evening. She is so fresh, so innocent, so alive. You can feel that she is totally open to you. You consider all the consequences. You look at her radiant skin, her clear eyes, her incredible smile. The way she moves, talks, and laughs makes you happy and fills you with energy. You arrive at her home. She says goodnight, leaves the car, and enters her house. and calls the police. No, I added that last part. You sit in the car for a moment, breathing slowly and deeply, smiling. That is creepy as fuck.
This is literally a story I've heard on Reddit of like a babysitter going in, but she told her dad, and then the dad took care of it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, gross.
It is creepy. And what's wild about this upholding of like 18-year-old women specifically is they would go for the younger ones.
Right, exactly.
It took me right back to sometime in the 90s, there was like that countdown timer for when the Olsen twins were going to turn 18. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was some like early internet culture thing. And even then I was like, that's disgusting, guys.
And it still goes on with other child actors today. And I can't believe,
Yeah, it's disturbing. But it's this idea that this youthful energy is somehow also for you. It's yours for the taking. You just have to consider the consequences of how you will take in this energy. If it's not sexual, then it's just, spending more time around young women because their presence will energize you. And it's like, what are you talking about, man?
yeah, very disturbing.
Yeah.
I guess the counterpoint to that is that when he talks about depolarization and he's talking about, he actually describes your woman being like an old shoe to you. Right? So again, there's this kind of terrible objectification going on. What does he even say? Like, she seems so ugly and dark that you are repulsed.
Yeah.
Your complete withdrawal leaves her barren at the core. So he even goes on to talk about disease symptoms begin to appear in her body. Like there's weird science in here as well.
Wow.
The disease is like aging.
Well, yeah, like for example.
Cellulite.
Oh dear.
He actually talks somewhere else about, I made a handwritten note, I can't remember exactly where in the book it is, but talking about the physiological, he talks specifically about the physiology of this, of not being true to the essential truths of masculinity and femininity that he is laying out here for us.
Yeah.
Which again goes to all kinds of awful places very quickly. It takes us to ableism, it takes us to ageism, it takes us to this conflation of good is beautiful and bad is ugly. And I mean it's all right here in the text.
I'm very fed up with crappy understanding of physiology, even within the scientific and medical space. As a trans person. And it's one of my pet peeves right now.
Yeah. I think we all have our particular peeves that are specifically tickled by this book. One section that I read that I was like, oh, I think Mika's going to think of me when he gets to this part was, where is it? Yeah, chapter 28. Each woman has a temperature that can heal or irritate you. Because again, women are there for the men. Oh, sorry. I mean, the feminine is there for the masculine. Sorry. Right. Some women are hotter, some are cooler. In general, blonde, light-skinned, Japanese, and Chinese women are cooler. Dark-skinned, brunette, red-headed, Korean, and Polynesian women are hotter. Even though a man might choose to remain in a committed intimacy with one woman, his needs for different temperatures of feminine energy may change over time. I want to understand where the data that supports this idea of blonde, light-skinned Japanese and Chinese women being cooler comes from. And of course, yeah, on the next page, he even refers to, he says, other women are hot. They are fiery, tempestuous, and quick of temper. You might have spoken of a fiery redhead or a hot-blooded Latina. Of course, not all redheads or Latinas are hot, nor are all blondes cool. Nevertheless, there's something true enough to be said about a woman's temperature. No citations, no footnotes, no references, no important note about the hot-blooded Latina trope being deeply hurtful to women from my culture. Because again, it gets reframed into like fetishization culture and this expectation that's like, ooh, you're this hot-blooded woman. You are a sexual being. You are already hypersexualized and therefore not capable of being like assaulted because you're up for it all the time.
That, and of course the dismissiveness of you can't possibly have a rational thought in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all emotion, and we can't take it seriously. And we know it's going to be different in 10 minutes' time, so we don't even have to listen. We don't even have to listen to this.
Yeah, it's asinine. It really is.
It really stinks of white supremacy and all of that stuff as well.
Oh, so much of it does. Yeah.
I mean, how would you even, on that topic, how would you even title a book the way of the superior man without all the without being conscious of the baggage around that language? Either you're oblivious to, the last 100 years of Western history, or you don't care.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not lost on me that, he's got Vitruvian Man on the cover.
Sure.
But it's also like little disclaimers.
From that very famously straight, masculine, logical Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes. It's like, yeah, all of these things put together and like a little disclaimer in a preface about like, I don't know, this includes everyone. But we couldn't possibly include every identification in a book, this and that. And it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, we get that. But you simply saying that, or even the publisher's note that says that, doesn't make up for some of the things that you're saying that do feed into narratives that have caused a lot of damage to marginalized communities.
I only put wood on the fire. I couldn't have known that it would turn into a bushfire.
Yeah. I only drove you to the clan meeting. I didn't actually want to influence your ideologies. It's like,
I waited in the car.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure you didn't get burned by the fire on the cross. Yeah. I think to go into some of the deeper racial implications of this writing would be beyond the scope of this particular conversation, because it would require dissecting a lot of things from a book that is quite short, again. And we'd have to put a lot more context into it. But I tell you what, this whole idea of women having different temperatures and how they can be healing or irritating, again, is just so objectifying. It's like, your woman can be a fur coat or an ice pack. It's like, ugh.
And that you might need different temperature women over your lifespan. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
like, women are just to be used and disposed of when they're no longer useful to you.
Yeah. I don't like this framing of women as part of some protocol for a man's own self-development. It's like, you're not the main character here, bro.
But you are. And that is the whole premise of the book. Like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's exactly the framing. And so it's not surprising that the manosphere laps it up.
Yeah. Which is so unfortunate, because I think about the cishet men in my life who I love and care for, and some of them who have been very damaged by these ways of thinking. They get very upset when they feel like they've been emasculated somehow, because they're still trying to understand where they fit into this idea of masculinity. They get upset when their relationships break down because there's some breakdown in the communication around, or because they're not living up to some expectation of what a man is supposed to be. And that's really upsetting when I see that happen to my friends and even partners who I've had. Some who have really sucked up narratives like the one that's painted in this book, or some who go in a different direction but then are ostracized because of it.
I've actually been putting in effort to tell some of my male friends who really embody a type of masculinity that is admirable to me. And I say to them, thank you for living as your true self and not letting those toxic ideals influence the way you express your masculinity, because to me, you are someone worth looking up to and helping me to find my identity. And because there are often people who have been bullied or left out, they really appreciate it. And I think it's important to show appreciation for people going against those cultural norms.
Absolutely. The men who hold space for other men in a way that is conscious of the struggles that exist in this understanding of masculinity and how it impacts personal relationships without denigrating women, that's something that I really appreciate. You know, I have a friend who, you know, in some of his men's groups has said, like, we're here to have open, raw conversations, but we're not here to bash women because that's not going to add value to this conversation. So if you're here to complain about your spouse or something, leave it out of the conversation.
Yep.
And these things are important.
Are we going to talk about the
Ejaculation?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say the pinnacle of where the weird science where that ultimately leads us, and it's this. I don't even know how to characterize it from how to contextualize this fascination, I guess, or fetishization of withholding ejaculation. Like that's so again, if we're talking about logic and reason, there are some surprising claims made in this.
Oh, yes.
In this book, right?
So in part 7 on body practices, the chapters are things like ejaculation should be converted or consciously chosen. Then there's breathe down the front, ejaculate up the spine.
Yeah.
Help us, Rudi. Explain this to us, please.
I have no explanation other than, I mean, there is a cultural context in which we can see that that there is an ancient tradition of asceticism, you know, that goes back centuries in the West, that this taps into at some level.
Yeah.
It's just really, again, within the context of a book like this, it just seems like, okay, wow, we have covered a lot of ground here suddenly. And again, as we've said multiple times in this conversation, you know, the idea that yes, if this is about logic and reason and the superior man is logical and reasonable, then where these sorts of ideas come from if they're not actually supported. It's not a direct quote, but I was saying at this, you know, even before we started the recording, you know, that it gave me real Dr. Strangelove vibes about, you know, maintaining the purity of our bodily essences, and
Yes.
it just goes. It was just I was quite surprised when this section came up,
Yeah.
so to speak. I just don't really know what to do with this.
Yeah, and even before that bodily practices section, the whole idea of ejaculation is used again to illustrate this level of control that your woman wants to see in you, right?
Right.
Bouncing back to chapter 30, what she wants is not what she says.
Of course not. 'Cause she can't be relied on.
No space in that dizzy little head of hers. He recounts a story, and he starts saying, "This is a true story." Thanks for letting us know.
Wow.
I have never written in before, but
Long-time listener, first-time caller. So he's talking about this guy who's learning sexual yoga. So he says, one day, this man and his wife were driving in their car. Passing a park, they spontaneously decided to stop the car, run into the woods, and make wild love on the grass beneath the trees. Neither of them had even made love outdoors before. Here they were, clawing at each other, growling, shrieking, passionately aggressive with one another. It was a real breakthrough for them. Suddenly, the man realized he would ejaculate unless they slowed down for a few seconds. "Stop moving for a bit," he told his wife. "If we keep going like this, I'm going to come." But the woman kept moving, even more vigorously. "I want you to come inside of me," she begged. "I want you to fill me with your seed." I don't know why she sounds like that. The man had a split second to decide which way he was going to go, and he decided to let go and give his woman her wish. He ejaculated inside of her and relaxed. But when he looked at his wife's face, she was clearly upset. "What's wrong?" he asked her. "You came," she answered. "But you said you wanted me to fill you with my seed, didn't you?" "Yes, but I said that in order to feel that you were strong enough not to."
Ew. Because a strong relationship is based on testing each other.
Yeah,
in
it's that
manipulative
woman
ways.
being testy again. Because then it goes on to talk about how he felt like he failed in his sexual yoga practice. He felt defeated and empty. He forgot that what she wants isn't what she says. And when you use a sexual scenario, and we've touched on this previously, when you use a sexual scenario to illustrate the fact that women don't mean what they say, that is dangerous.
So dangerous.
Yeah.
Worst.
Every time she sucks you into an uncontrollable need to ejaculate, she has conquered you. She controls you and masters you. She is in charge sexually no matter what manly gestures you make before ejaculating.
What manly gestures? What, like going to chop some wood or something?
Well, who knows? With a simple flick of her tongue, a silky moan, or a slurping tilt of her pelvis, she can drain you of life. And deep down, she knows the world can do the same to you. So this is, again, if we put this into a mythological context, this is the succubus. This is, again, there's centuries of folk mythology and bullshit behind this. Again, that just makes it really easy to accept, because these ideas, and when an idea like that is presented to us, it doesn't strike us as unnatural or surprising, because we've heard some variant of it, as long as we've been exposed to this culture. Yeah. So it's very persuasive in that way. I mean,
the slurping tilt
of her pelvis. I mean, this is like #awkward. But even then, like it doesn't. It seems to it makes sense in some way, and I think that's part of the danger of a text like this is that, as patently ridiculous as it is at one level, it doesn't come across as patently ridiculous at another, because we're already enculturated into accepting the premise that's being presented.
Yes. So there isn't anything revolutionary presented in this book at all.
No.
Which is something that I find interesting, because David Deida is often described as like a revolutionary thinker, provocative. Like, sure, he's provocative, like somehow transforming lives with these new ways of thinking. And it's like, but this is all of this has been said before in different ways. Yeah. Many times. It's just when it comes out in this form, it kind of takes on a different direction. Yeah. But my goodness, like all this stuff about ejaculation, like
there's a lot for such a short book.
Yeah. And the whole ejaculate up the spine thing. And I spent a little too much time watching these like no fap culture videos and all of this stuff that just kind of made me think, like, gosh, like, are you guys enjoying this? Like, I don't know.
I don't really understand what the hell they're talking about. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with ejaculating myself.
Yeah.
But
same. And I don't want to, like, shame anyone who participates in this kind of thing. I don't want to... It might sound like I'm judging people for this, but I'm really not. What I'm querying is the way this has been used to illustrate some form of superiority.
Yes.
And universal truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a universal truth.
Like, there's something to be said about if you withhold orgasm for a few days, it does increase sperm count. And it, I find, it can increase the pleasure of that, but it doesn't make you superior or somehow like more pure or...
Well, and one more time, we're seeing personal preferences packaged as universals.
Yes.
Yeah. And it doesn't leave room for other ways of being.
I think the danger is for any man in the target audience of this book to feel that he is somehow inferior if this is not how he chooses to move through the world.
Yeah.
I mean, and very explicitly inferior, because that's the hierarchy that's established in the book. So this is not a book that is free of value judgment. It's not a book that's describing a way of being in the world and advocating for it. It goes further, right? Because it actually quite explicitly says that no, not only is this a way, but this is the superior way.
Yeah.
And it's just part of nature.
And it's just part of nature.
Yeah. In part 5, Your Dark Side, there's a chapter called You Are Always Searching for Freedom, in which he talks about war, saying you are probably also familiar with the darker aspects of the masculine desire for freedom. War, which is motivated by the desire for freedom, is a quintessential masculine pursuit. Most sports are ritualized war, but actual war itself resonates with the core of most men. That is a scary thing to put onto our men. That, like, to actually live up to this idea of masculinity, like, you have to accept that that's just a part of you. That's just a part of who we are as men.
And again, it's yet another claim that, I mean, apart from being unsubstantiated, but it also doesn't resonate with experience, right? So again, if we stop to think about the men in your life, think even specifically about the cishet men in your life, the people who are the target audience for this book, how many of them have a military career or have ever engaged with that, or who have ever, been part of a military force or taken part in military action, or aspired to that? Like, it's not very many.
Yeah. And when people get into arguments about, like, women in combat, for example, they'll evoke images of, like, oh, just imagine your sister or your wife, your daughter going out to battle and dying. And it's like, so it's not okay for women, but our men are expendable. They're just war bots that we can just, like, program to go into these battlefields like human Roombas because it's about the quest for freedom. Like, I'm not okay with that.
It's interesting how it's framed as well, right? And even because, we're here in Australia, and the way that Australia is this geographically isolated region of the world whose, I mean, apart from European colonization, the freedom of Australia has never been seriously threatened by anybody since then. Yet there's so much rhetoric, which we see every year around Anzac Day, about how Australian troops who in terrible tragedies were slaughtered but it was for our freedom. And it's like, that freedom gets invoked so many times in that whole rhetoric, and it actually makes no historical sense at all.
Yeah.
It was for our colonial masters.
Sure. Yeah. and of course for the arms manufacturers, who all became fantastically wealthy out of it.
Oh, yay.
This idea of the warrior. I mean, he talks about the warrior. So and again, like I was saying earlier, the one cross-cultural image that he seems to find value in is that of the samurai. So this preoccupation with combat as kind of intrinsic and essential to the masculine.
Well, if you give yourself no other emotional outlet, all you've got left is to express it through anger and violence.
Which is, on a personal note, something I became aware of as well, that for me, realizing that my emotional life is very important to me and one of the things I value most in my existence, and the realization that anger was about the one emotional expression that was accepted and regarded and validated as a man was really deeply uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
And when I became conscious of that.
And just as a both sides of the coin experience from my direction is anger is easy with testosterone. Like, I used to be able to express all emotions fairly equally, including anger. But once I took testosterone, anger was easy to express. Other emotions I had to actually sit down and give space for. And I think it's kind of a lazy approach to just be like, oh, well, anger and violence is all that men are allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't actually put in the work.
No. There are so many parts in this book that involve controlling your woman through some sort of physical expression or some sort of sexual expression, through ravishing her, this and that. But even in the not quite as sexual aspects, there's an undertone of sexuality that comes into play. There's one part talking about there's an argument relating to someone making a mistake even though they've made lots of great successes in their life, blah, blah, blah. She gets upset. I'll read this paragraph. Instead of getting angry because she's so upset that you made one little mistake in a long series of successes, instantly shift the energy between you. So again, he's the main character, right? He's the one in charge. Remember, history is irrelevant to the feminine, so your mistake is as easily forgotten as your successes. As soon as you see she's upset, immediately assume happiness. Yeah. Shock her with your love. Make her smile and laugh with your humor. Lick her neck. Or lift her off the ground and pretend you're King Kong. Surprise her in some loving way, and the emotional slate will be wiped clean. Your momentary failure will be effectively vanished, as irrelevant as the long line of your successes.
I wonder how that's worked out for him.
And what's that called in abusive relationships again? The whole, the apology part of it? The abuse and the apology so that you keep staying with them?
Yeah, that whole section, it's very dismissive. It's very gaslighty. It's very, what she says doesn't actually matter. Because, again, we've been groomed to accept that she doesn't actually say what she means. And you can just assume happiness and act like an idiot, pretend you're King Kong, pretend you're a giant ape, lick her. and she'll be fine after that. I can't imagine anything that would piss me off more when I'm really angry about something than some dude picking me up
and licking your neck.
And licking my neck. No. That's not how you resolve a dispute.
So in the 4-stage cycle of abuse, it's tension, incident, reconciliation, and calm. And so that's the reconciliation, the whole just acting like everything's fine and being oh no, we're going to be nice and now everything's fine. I mean, when he says made a mistake, I'm just making assumptions there about something. She was angry about something and upset.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a whole story that comes in before that.
Okay.
That wasn't the one about forgetting to pick up the milk, was it? Was that the...
No, I just looked back to see if it was that, but no.
It was another one of the testing scenarios where I think he'd closed some big deal at work, but had forgotten to bring the milk home. And she was angry at him, but actually she was testing the relationship.
Yeah, because he'd made $1 million that day, but forgot to pick up the milk.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's not about the milk or the $1 million. It's about testing the relationship.
Yeah.
That's what she's actually doing. She's not actually pissed off because she kept asking him to bring the milk home and he forgot.
No. But he did remind her that now they can buy a dairy farm.
Yeah.
So they can have milk whenever. That as an illustration of someone trying to test a relationship is really it's cray. So in short, sometimes women do say exactly what they mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
They're not always testing their men. This idea that is what women are actually attracted to. Like, I've known plenty of women who are attracted to those sorts of dynamics. I've known plenty of divorcees who have had a lot of experience with that dynamic. Okay? So even when he closes part 5, he tells us this. Your woman knows your weaknesses better than anybody. She knows where you will falter and give up. She knows the degree of mediocrity you will settle for. And she knows your true capacity as a full man, a man of free consciousness and love. Her gift, if she is a good woman, is to test you with her darkest moods over and over and over until your consciousness is unperturbed by feminine challenge, and you are able to pervade her with your love, just as you are here to pervade the world. In response to your fearless consciousness, she will drench your world in love and light.
In fact, it's her actual purpose.
Yes.
Existing.
I love that it ends with love and light, because that's
Perfect.
such a key toxic positivity staple.
Yep.
That's a good example of how, even though he's tried to put this veil of, oh, well, it doesn't have to mean a masculine man and a feminine woman, but he puts a literal value judgment on being a good woman or a superior man.
Yeah.
To be anything else is an inferior version.
Her gift, if she is a good woman, is to test you with her darkest moods. He's not even saying if she's of a feminine essence. It's if she's a good woman.
Yep.
Yeah. Not my favorite thing.
Yeah.
And I know we've said this a few times during this discussion, and if anything in what we're saying seems oddly repetitive, I think that's a reflection of the book. Because so many of the same things are said over and over and over again, just with a different, like through different instruments, different forms of poetry. But here's one paragraph that I think really highlights, again, a big problem in how these dynamics play out in sexual scenarios. Okay. This is in the chapter, Own Your Darkest Desires.
Yeah.
Yeah. He writes, as an experiment, the next time you make love with your woman, feel through your own physical and emotional boundaries into her. Feel into her so deeply that you become unaware of yourself and totally aware of her. Feel yourself move into her, your boundaries dissolving so that you become her, utterly aware of her breath, her movements, her emotions. Love her with more abandon than you've ever allowed yourself before. Feel through not only your boundaries, but also her boundaries, so that you are both dissolved in the immense force of your loving. Relax into the force of love so completely that only love remains. Just because you end a paragraph with only love remains doesn't take away from the fact that what you have just said describes a scenario of sexual coercion that involves pushing through her boundaries as well as your own. That's not cool.
I wonder if he means like borders rather than boundaries, like merge into one being, like the spiritual idea of merging into one being. But the fact that he's used the word boundary is a little, is a red flag.
Yes. And that's a key issue when we talk about how people take his writing and reimagine it for our modern times.
Well, I actually find I've seen kind of this split in almost like a evolution of what people have taken from his writing. You've got the really explicit misogyny, red pilly sort of guys where they're just like, fuck it, let's just say it.
Yeah.
Then the people I'm more in contact with and that I find more concerning because it's more noxious, that it's dangerous. They use the spiritual terminology to reframe some very toxic and dangerous ideas by saying, oh, it's about the spiritualness and like this is what we are here for and being part of each other. And there is often sexual coercion and using manipulative terms and thoughts to make people comply with what they want, because particularly it's often within spaces of very open, genuine people. I'm involved in kind of like alternative, hippie, like open-minded spaces, and there's a lot of people who are ready to accept those sort of ideas. And I often get these very yucky feelings when I meet some of these guys. I mean, it's not just guys. There's actually quite a few women that use similar things. And all sorts of gendered people are open to this sort of spiritual terminology or progressive terminology as ways to get what you want. As manipulation. It's not to do with actually being a good person.
It's not to do with being of service to others.
Yes, that's what he's saying. Like, it's a giving yourself to the world. Most of it sounds like what to do to get what you want out of these situations.
And that's something you see a lot in cults and other high control groups, where you've got a central figure, usually a man, not always, but usually, who has sexual agency over all of the disciples to the point where they breed a bunch of children with, the 18-year-old babysitters, so to speak. And it's gross.
One of the concerning things is quite a few of these people that I have met are ones involved in communes and things that I'm just like, oh, cultas are starting. And I just don't know what you can do about those situations other than...
it's tricky.
I know what you're saying about the way the language gets co-opted and used by people of every gender. And for me, like when I see anybody in the PD space or spiritual space who is attaching the to masculine or feminine, that's a red flag. This is at best uncritical and at worst actually harmful.
It's often a pipeline to other things that are causing a lot of problems in society. And it doesn't always mean that people have bad intentions with this stuff.
No, really.
Sometimes it helps people to articulate what they're feeling inside or how they're operating to use these expressions. I'm sitting in my masculine right now. I'm sitting in my feminine. And I don't judge people when they're using different language for self-analysis to try to communicate their needs and their experience to the world. But it's when it comes from this top-down, like, no, this polemic, this like, this is always how it is. Now men, go forth and ravish. That's when it's like, bruh, come on.
It is, I guess, symptomatic that we have, we still don't have, this language is still so gendered generally. It's not like this exists in a vacuum, again, like we've said a few times today, but that it is coming from deeply held cultural beliefs about what is masculine and what is feminine, and whether it's expressed by data or by society in general, and the expectations we put, as we know, even on infants.
Yeah. Yeah.
That there are particular ways of being in the world that are valid and ones that are not so valid.
Yeah.
And we've still got a journey there as a society. We certainly have not, I think, reached, and probably never will reach, a place of perfect
Yes.
equality.
I was grappling with how to address the whole feminine and masculine as even an identifying factor of personality traits and such from a trans perspective, in that they aren't intrinsic and permanent things. They're very much culturally based. I can say from a hormonal perspective, there is some influence, a little bit of influence, but it's very minor. But we have to also recognize that what we call feminine and masculine are, what we're trying to say is, from our current cultural perspective, something that is feminine, and from our current cultural perspective, something that is masculine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even in identifying our own gender, it's really hard because there isn't a solid
Yes.
foundation for that.
Yes. And we need to stop associating the things that are traditionally in our culture connected to the feminine or femininity in general with something lesser than.
Some of which are only decades old, let's
Yeah.
not forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whew. All right. So we've been talking a lot about one person's ideas of what makes a superior man. It's a challenging conversation for me, for sure, when I think about the men in my life and what expectations they've had to try to live up to. But I've got a question for us, starting with Rudi. Tell us, Rudi, what in your mind is the true way of the superior man?
Well, for me, it's something that I've wrestled with and thought about a lot. And I just want to preface it by saying that I find the language of superiority here icky, but it's what we've got to work with. One of the things I came to realize when I thought more about masculinity was that once you look at all the positive things that are in that basket, none of them, to me, is usefully distinguishable from being a decent human being. Like, I don't see any of those virtues and any of those positive traits as being explicitly and fundamentally belonging to any gender. So, and I've thought about this a lot, both for myself and for my two sons. And I think about, I always say to them, like, the things I praise in them, they're smart, they're kind, they're funny.
Yeah.
I think you could do a lot worse. So I think, just be a decent human being.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. So, Mika, what to you is the true way of the superior man?
Again, like Rudi said, in my world, no one's superior. Everyone has equal value, even if society doesn't give that or honor that.
Yep.
So a good example of a man, to me, is soft, kind, and emotionally attuned. These are the men who most embody masculinity to me. They're men who help me to understand my gender identity. They're so comfortable in who they are, they have nothing to prove. Their manliness is just like very natural, a very natural expression of who they are. Like, it's not there to kind of be opposing thing or to have control over anyone else. And it's somewhat separate from like the cultural identity of men. They don't let the gender stereotypes dictate their lives, to let that restrict their experience of the world, or to miss out on wonderful experiences, even skills that are seen as feminine.
Yeah.
These are the men that let me see that I am a man. And to me, masculinity is kind and caring, and it is strong. It's strong in knowing that you have nothing to prove to others and that you can just be yourself without having to worry about how others see you. And those are the men too, where their relationships with their woman, with their equal partner, is beautiful. Like, they work together, they see each other, they listen to each other. And, like, to me, that's, like, a really beautiful thing.
Thank you, Mika.
And, Leslie, can you tell me about what your view is of the way of a superior man?
Well, to me, the true way of the superior man, again, isn't specifically about gender roles and isn't about being superior as much as it is, if superiority has a role in this, I would say it's only in a person striving to be better than they were yesterday, in that they are more embodying their true selves. And with that context, I feel that a superior man is someone who does the work to try to make the world a better place for everyone. You can see why this is very non-gendered for me, you know? To me, a superior man wants to be a protector, but not the protector.
Yes.
To me, a superior man wants to allow other men the freedom to express themselves however comes naturally for them, in a way that's the most authentic to them, and will be that safe place for someone to land, you know, for the rest of the menfolk to gather with them and say, all right, let's strengthen our communities of men in a way that allows us to nurture people around us without fear of judgment for being too girly, whatever that even means. Again, it's that femphobia that comes through in those things. So to summarize it, I would say that to me, the way of the superior man is to strive for a constant development of their emotional intelligence and their impact on society.
Beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have to agree.
Thank you. So that was quite a heady conversation.
Yeah.
I would say. First of all, I want to thank both of you for coming back to the studio for another great chat.
Yes.
And especially thanks to Rudi for joining us today
Oh, thank you for having me.
and helping us survive this conversation. So, Rudi, we've gotten to know you a little bit, or our listeners have gotten to know you a little bit. If people want to connect with you further, how can they reach you?
I'm very active on the socials, so I welcome everybody and anybody who's interested to follow me on, connect on Facebook or on Twitter or on, X. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be there actually, but Instagram, LinkedIn, so I'm active in multiple spaces. Choose your poison, I'll be there.
What's your username?
Rudi Landmann, so I'm very findable.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes as well.
And Leslie, what about us? How will people connect with us?
Well, again, for now, the best way to connect is through my Instagram, leslievcoaching. Send us some messages, send us some love. And if there's a particular book that you're really keen for us to discuss, you know, shoot a message through there as well. And while you're doing that, don't forget to rate us. Give us a big, juicy 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. That would be really appreciated to help get this show into more people's ears. Yeah.
Oh.
And with that, I think it's time to close with a quote. So Rudi has brought us one.
This is from Angela Davis, who said, "No march, movement, or agenda that defines manhood in the narrowest terms and seeks to make women lesser partners in this quest for equality can be considered a positive step."
Wonderful. Love Angela Davis.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And we will see you in Chapter 5. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.